So my name is Jeff Morgan. I'm from Dallas, Texas, and in the second video I'm going to be reading a letter from a lady who was very influential in the homeschool movement. Quite a iconic person. She's actually was on TV and spoke about homeschooling very positively. Her name is Lori Vance, and she wrote this letter that I am going to present to the Juvenile Justice and Family Issues Committee on Wednesday, April the 3rd, when I go down to testify in Austin. But this is her letter. My name is Lori Vance, and I currently reside in Tennessee with my second husband, Mark. I am a licensed nurse, a trained family court mediator, a graduate student earning my second master's degree, and a doctoral candidate in the field of psychology and family therapy at a well-known Midwestern university. I am a wife and mother of 5 and a grandmother to many. I am also an experienced home educator with a graduate degree in education, as well as a published author and writer. I am an avid supporter of homeschooling and of the traditional view of family and home. Having recently heard of the issue of homeschooling and grandparents being discussed in your great state of Texas, I had considered composing a white paper on the matter and submitting it to you all for your review. After all, I do reside in the volunteer state, and historically, we have come to your aid before. However, because I have personal experience, I have decided to just write a letter from my heart for your kind consideration. I homeschooled 4 of my 5 children from age 8 through high school. I found some of their restrictions to be quite burdensome indeed, but not because they were, but because our home was so chaotic. I was encouraged to join the HSLDA, and that's the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. When we were homeschooling, we also were members of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, headed by attorney Mike Ferris he's in the DC area right now in Virginia. I was encouraged to join the HSLDA as well as local home education group. I taught at a home through them for nearly 18 years. My children were well behaved in public, modestly dressed, and full of good character traits. Or so it seemed. I was actively bullied by leaders in my group to go up against the local school district and to be only friends with people inside the organization and to keep family members away from my kids who disagreed with the lifestyle, even mildly. I was warned not to speak to state professionals in the group. These home educators, who were all members of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, were also health professionals. Some were even family doctors and counselors, others midwives and breastfeeding consultants. In other words, mandatory reporters of child neglect, child abuse, and domestic violence, all of which was going on in my home while she was homeschooling. Obviously, it was incumbent upon these people to protect me and my children. I was a very young mother, and at the time, I was grossly undereducated. However, they made no secret that the most important thing to them was to protect their God-given authority over their homes and children. In the state in which we lived at that time, grandparents, aunts, and uncles had no legal standing to challenge parents who were hiding abuse using the homeschooling laws. I fought for these laws in a desperate attempt to hide my abuse and the abuse of my innocent children. Like many families with high-profile cases, I taught my kids to lie, to smile to the press, and to never let on what our life at home was really like. I was told by my group and by my HSLDA literature to fear the police and social workers, and I quite adeptly imparted these fears to my children as they aged. And by the way, nobody is saying that there are not legitimate problems with the social workers, especially CPS. I, for one, will tell you there are huge problems with CPS. But sometimes CPS steps in and wants to take children out of home simply because they are being homeschooled. That is a huge problem as well. However, to go back to the issue here, there are times in which social workers, if they actually act rightly, might notice some issues of abuse. And furthermore, if grandparents and uncles and aunts had access to the families, they would be the ones who could actually step in and protect the children. So my children learned that lying to protect homeschooling was more important than anything else, including our safety, including our family members whom we had distanced ourselves from. It was more important than everything. Now my kids are all grown and gone, except for one with special needs. We didn't get that happy family that my group leaders said I would have. In fact, one daughter is back in our home state with all of her children and her husband, whom I have not seen in 6 years. At last count, I have 6 grandchildren. We are not allowed to see them because when they were being neglected and abused in the same ways that my daughter was, my new husband and I took custody of the babies in hopes that they could all get help for all involved. My former group leaders intervened and came to Tennessee to collect everyone and took them back to Pennsylvania. This is the homeschooling people. The homeschooling people, the leaders of the homeschooling people said nothing can interfere with this God-given right to homeschool your children, even if there's abuse going on. We must stand by the parents. We must stand for this God-given right. We want unsupervised teaching in the home, even if there is abuse going on. They came in and they took the children. They took them back to Pennsylvania, where they moved in with our former family doctor, who is a homeschooling group leader. They are homeschooling in secret, and we are permitted no contact with any of them. Because again, homeschooling is the most important thing, and according to the Texas Home School Coalition and Tim Lambert in the state of Texas, grandparents are evil if they oppose homeschooling. Grandparents need to be vilified. Grandparents need to be rejected. Grandparents should not have a place in their grandchildren's lives if they somehow oppose homeschooling, even if there is abuse going on that they're trying to protect the children from. This has all happened because of the mindset of the radical homeschool movement, who want unfettered control over children even while their families are forever divided, and worse, children are beaten, neglected, and abused in the name of family. Now, this may be the minority of families that it happens in, but it happens. It happens, and it happens more frequently than we recognize. My grandchildren are growing up believing that we are enemies of homeschooling, and once again, she is one of the leaders, has been one of the leaders for homeschooling. My grandchildren are growing up believing that we are enemies of homeschooling, of the church, and of their parents. In reality, we were only trying to protect them from abuse and neglect that sent them to the local emergency room for treatment. Members of the committee, members of the press, Mr. Ferris and others, all we really want is the right to love our grandchildren that we were good enough to babysit, good enough to pay rent for, and food for, and diapers for, but not good enough to see anymore. This is what the radical homeschool movement will do. It will exclude grandparents, aunts and uncles, anybody who gets in the way of unsupervised, unmonitored homeschooling they've deemed to be an enemy. And in many instances, these are grandparents who love their grandchildren. The Texas Homeschool Coalition is willing to adapt and actually teach and actually implement an anti-biblical viewpoint in the name of parental rights, and they claim to be a Christian organization. We still fully support homeschooling, but under the proper circumstances. Children should be allowed access to other family members. I am not asking for total state control or oversight, just responsible safeguards in the lives of children who can't defend themselves. And as she was saying, we're not asking for the state to do this. We want grandparents, we want aunts, we want uncles to be able to exercise a proper oversight and a proper loving relationship with their grandchildren. Grandchildren are the pride and joy of grandparents. And grandparents often care for grandchildren even more than their own children. And yet the Texas Homeschool Coalition will testify against a reasonable bill to allow grandparents to have this relationship with grandchildren because it goes against their radical homeschooling agenda, in which they want unsupervised and unmonitoring homeschooling to take place with no state and no relative interference. If you are one of the people that are concerned about this, they deem you to be an enemy. Finally, while I have great respect for my friend Mike Ferris of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and by the way, I also have respect for Mike Ferris. I've been to his house only once, long time ago. He probably doesn't remember, but he's a very astute legal mind, and he's defended many people in these cases. Been one of the great attorneys as far as I am concerned. However, I do not agree that parents should be allowed to raise children in secrecy or in isolation. And they certainly should not be able to cut off grandparents simply because grandparents are concerned about the upbringing of their grandchildren. This is not healthy, and it can have disastrous consequences, and I would add it is completely an unbiblical viewpoint, as I discussed in the first video. Please restore our rights to be families and to be part of our grandchildren's lives. Please don't let them be abused in secret by those who hide behind well-meaning laws that protect good, dedicated homeschoolers. And once again, many homeschoolers are wonderful people, but there are people that are the more fringe fanatical that will deny any type of access to grandparents or to relatives because they may interfere with the homeschooling agenda. They take a very radical approach to the parental rights issue. Parental rights means that no grandparents are allowed. That is just completely an absurd position. And again, it is an anti-biblical position, and it hurts our grandchildren. The grandchildren want to have relationships with their grandparents. Please restore our rights to be families and to be part of our grandchildren's lives. Please don't let our grandchildren be abused in secret by those who hide behind well-meaning laws that protect good, dedicated homeschoolers. Thank you. Sincerely, Lori Vance, home educator and bereft, alienated grandparent. This was written March 28, 2019. Lori, thank you for your letter. I wish you were down here to testify in person. We need more people like you to speak out of the against the abuse that the homeschooling community can inflict at times, not all the time, at times, but the abuse that the Texas Homeschool Coalition often sponsors, whether it be in their videos or the way they testify against good bills, simply because they want unfettered, unmonitored, unsupervised homeschooling rights to be the rights for every person, even if neglect or abuse or any other type of situation is taking place. Tim Lambert and the Texas Homeschool Association, the Texas Homeschool Coalition in general, will vilify grandparents to keep their homeschooling rights. We need to pass House Bill 575, which is a grandparent access and visitation bill. It's a very reasonable bill that it would allow grandparents to be involved in their grandchildren's lives and would allow grandchildren to have that experience of love and security and identity and everything else that grandparents can bring that parents can't completely bring because parents and grandparents have different roles. Thank you.